Well, hello there. My name is Paul Williams. I'm from blogging Theology, and you are all most welcome. And today I have a very special guest, Dr. Shabbir Akhtar from the University of Oxford. You are most welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you. And today I'm just going to introduce briefly who Shabbir is. For those of you who don't know, he's a philosopher trained at Cambridge University as a PhD in Kierkegaard, I think, the famous Danish philosopher, who's really worth reading, actually. He's widely published on pluralism, race relations in the UK, and Islam's and Christianity's differing responses to modern secularism, particularly in the UK. He's written some of my favorite books, actually. He's written The Quran and the Secular Mind, published in 2007, an absolute feast for the intellect. It's in one of Tim Winter's recommended reading books in his reading list, and I agree with that. And another great one is Islam as a Political Religion in 2010, another really weighty and fascinating tome. I recommend both of those. But also, he's gone even beyond that. He's published the first of a 3-volume commentary on the Greek New Testament called The New Testament in Muslim Eyes, Paul's Letter to the Galatians, published by Routledge. And I think that may be a first that a Muslim philosopher, theologians actually engaged with contemporary cutting-edge biblical scholarship and looking at the Greek of Paul's letter to the Galatians. So I have read that, and that is actually for all theological students, again, another work that's highly recommended, actually, not just obviously by me, but by the scholars. And he's currently a member of the Faculty of Theology and Religions at Oxford University. And I know you've been a professor in the States, I think in Indonesia as well. You were
In Malaysia.
In Malaysia as well. So incredibly diverse, varied, and fascinating career. But the reason he is here today, I invited him to appear today, is another book that he's just republished, actually. It's called Be Careful with Muhammad, Salman Rushdie and the Battle for Free Speech. Now, it's the second edition with a huge new preface, which I've read, and it's actually a work in its own right, a massive survey of issues to do with freedom of speech and Islam and secularism and many, many issues. So it's that book, I think, that really triggered me to think, wow, maybe Dr. Shabbir can talk about that. So can you just, first of all, say a bit about who Salman Rushdie is? Because not particularly younger viewers are going to have no idea who this gentleman is. And also this book that he wrote, the Satanic Verses. It sounds evil. What is this book about? And why has it caused such a furore, such an upset amongst Muslims in the UK?
Well, thank you very much, Paul, for inviting me. Salam to everyone, and also Happy New Muslim Year in the month of Muharram, the second. A good time to speak on this topic. Paul, it's a mutual pleasure, by the way. I'm also an admirer of your blogging theology, and you're a very erudite man yourself, even though you don't have the title of professor. You don't need one. Let me say what this book is about. It's, as you say, it's goes back to an event that took place about 30 years ago, the Salman Rushdie affair. Not just the publication of Rushdie's book, The Satanic Verses, which I'll explain what's in it, but also our Muslim response to it. I was one of the campaigners, and this book, actually, the original book, is a record of a campaign. And the preface, 30 years on, deals with everything that's happened in the last 30 years. The book was published in 1988 autumn, and then I wrote my response in 1989, soon after the Fatwa was issued, the sentencing Salman Rushdie to death by the late Ayatollah Khomeini. My book is a survey of all these events, the book burning in Bradford. 30 years on, I think the issues are still relevant. Paul, what I do is I look at the Charlie Hebdo affair, among other cartoon controversies in the Danish context as well. That's part of the preface, but the preface really does try and cover it multidimensionally. The event actually is a very interesting one in Islamic history. It's greatly debated, meaning whether there was such an incident. The allegation is that and it's recorded in Islamic history, by the way, in Tabri and other historians, that on one occasion in Surah 53, the Prophet's attempt to deliver the revelation was interrupted by the devil, who inserted a number of verses into the revelation. Now, these verses are not found in any manuscript of the Quran. They were immediately removed during the lifetime of the Prophet. So, and there's a lot of dispute about whether the incident is genuine or
Yeah.
whether it was actually just invented, perhaps possibly by Muslims themselves, to provide an occasion of revelation for a verse in chapter 22, a different surah of the Quran, which says that whenever Satan tries to interject something into the mouth of one of our messengers, we ourselves, meaning God, we cancel it, we annul it. So some people think it may actually just be an artificial maneuver. Others think the incident is real, but of course it doesn't occur in any extant manuscript of the Holy Quran. What I think Rushdie did is that he took an arguably real incident in the history of the revelation of the Quran and early Islam, and then he exaggerated it. He said, well, if a couple of verses in the Quran could temporarily at least be from the devil, why isn't it possible that the entire Quran is from the devil?
Oh,
It's obviously a great hyperbole and exaggeration. So I take him to task for that suggestion because I think such a revisionist account of history, even in a fictional form, is a very profound insult and abuse. It's not really a critique of Islamic origins. That's the background. The rest was our reaction to it, which I've documented. And I must say, Paul, that I believe that the Salman Rushdie affair is not really just to do with Salman Rushdie. It's true that he wrote the book to which we reacted. But had we not reacted, there would not have been such an affair at all. I think that the affair was an important one. A lot of people criticized me recently, 30 years on, saying our reaction to this book was wrong. Perhaps we ourselves are responsible for the Islamophobia that has grown in the aftermath. To which I respond, well, Islamophobia predates the Rushdie affair, and sadly, it will long outlive it. Is that sufficient, Paul, for now?
well, that's very succinct summary. I mean, there's some spectacular global phenomena that happen. For example, as you say, the Ayatollah Khomeini issued what in the West is understood to be a fatwa is a death sentence, isn't it? In the West, that's how it's understood because it couldn't be further from the truth. A fatwa is simply a legal ruling issued by a jurist. It could be on any subject, but
Absolutely.
nevertheless, yeah, the Ayatollah issued a death sentence, and the Salman Rushdie, who's a novelist, given an OBE by the Queen for his services to Britain, extraordinary, really, had to be protected 24 hours a day by British police. He may still be protected, I don't know. And so he's virtually in hiding for many years because of this novel, satanic verses that he wrote all those years ago. So it's an extraordinary reaction to a work of fiction. But
Well,
it's something that's, sorry, carry on.
right. Well, Paul. Firstly, with regard to fatwa, as you say, the fatwa simply means legal judgment. It need not be binding. However, if it's issued by a head of state, like Khomeini was, obviously it is binding, at least for the people who follow him in that country. The word fatwa, it's a Quranic term, incidentally, the verb and the noun I used. It basically means a judgment. So obviously a fatwa from God, for example, in several parts of the Quran, there's a fatwa about a particular very intricate matter of inheritance at the end of chapter 4. Obviously, the word fatwa, the verbal form, is used there. But actually, in Islamic history, there have been a variety of fatawa, or plural fatwa. One of the most famous ones was, ironically, given by Ibn Rushd, Averroes, who wrote a book, a whole treatise, in the form of fatwa, because he was a Maliki jurist. And the book is called The Compatibility of the Sharia, the Holy Law, with Wisdom, Philosophy. So it's strange that the word fatwa was associated with something purely intellectual until recent years, when now, of course, many people misinterpret it to mean the fatwa means a death sentence specifically on Salman Rushdie. Of course, it does mean that. But nonetheless, it's a pardonable error because a lot of Westerners wouldn't know that background, which is why I'm glad you asked me so I can clarify it. I should also clarify another point in order to maintain a position of moral consistency for my work as a campaigner. I don't wish to comment on the validity of the fatwa, and I don't do so in my book. What I say there is that this fatwa is for people who are subject to its jurisdiction. That's to say, whoever takes Imam Khomeini's fatwa seriously. Obviously, I live in England, which is my country of adopted citizenship. I enjoy a degree of religious freedom here. There are occasions when the secular state law conflicts with religious law and my conscience, but that doesn't give me the right to implement a fatwa here. So I want to make that clear that I wanted to maintain a morally consistent position on the fatwa. However, I do defend the book burning, which you may come to later on, which I think is fully within the law. And my book was written as a liberal response to Rushdie, meaning I wanted to, as a philosopher, argue a case rather than simply respond to critics who are saying, well, you Muslims don't know how to answer Salman Rushdie, therefore you wish to kill him. I said, no, that's not the case. We can answer him if we're given a chance in the media. And eventually we were after a long struggle. As far as the killing of the apostate is concerned, I do debate the issue of apostasy in general, but not just simply with respect to Rushdie. Finally, a PS. The idea of a legal judgment, why there is no monopoly of Islam. You know, Catholic canon law is a response. I'm sure you know it more probably better than I do. So, you know, we're not unique in having legal judgments. As you know, Catholicism, different from Protestantism, does have certain kind of canon law, and you can ask for authorities, particularly the Holy Father, to issue an important fatwa, if you like, or response.
It's interesting. It just struck me as you were talking about Catholic canon law during the time of Elizabeth I, Queen of England, of course, and she was much hated by Catholics for all sorts of reasons. She was seen as a heretic and a persecutor of Catholics. So the Rome, the Pope, actually withdrew recognition of her as a head of state. And what this meant was that she was a legitimate target for assassination by Catholics. And this didn't help Catholics at all in England, but nevertheless, it was a kind of a fatwa in a way.
Absolutely.
And that's when Catholics could have legitimately assassinated the Queen of England.
Right, that's true, Paul. But what I would add, sorry to interrupt you, what I would add, it's a very fascinating historical point you make, and it's absolutely true what you're saying. The reason why people are not so familiar with this incident about the possible threat of assassination because of the Pope's action is because a great deal of papal encyclicals, as you know, as they're called, papal letters, are not binding in the same way as a responsa or juristic response would be. But what you're referring to is a very serious matter of canon law. It wasn't just a papal encyclical. Papal encyclicals contain what's called exhortation and admonition from the Holy Father. Of course, they have normative authority. But anyway, enough of that. I don't want to get distracted into a debate on Catholicism.
Thank you. No, it's just one of the quick thing I wanted to mention about. Sorry, this is a distraction, but I think it really is quite relevant to get a rounded picture of religious history in Britain. Every November the 5th, we celebrate, or most of us celebrate, bonfire night, and we celebrate. Hey, if we even know why we're celebrating the deliverance of the King James, and Parliament from being blown up by these nasty, evil Catholics. But what's interesting, the Catholics did try, and some Catholics, I should say, did try and blow up Parliament and kill the King because of what he was doing to Catholics. But I'm reminded of a recent book called The Gunpowder Plot by Fraser, who she's a historian and a novelist, and it was dedicated to her children. And in the inside cover, it says, "Oh, and some of my children had really wished the gunpowder plotters had succeeded." It was a sense of, there was a real cause for injustice. And I thought, reading that, hang on, if a Muslim had said that, they would have been prosecuted for terrorism and offense.
Well, actually, a Muslim did say that.
Apologizing for a terrorist attack on Parliament. And no one, Antonia Fraser, that was the book. Antonia Fraser, the great novelist.
Absolutely. I'm aware of it. By the way, just to follow up what you're saying, Paul, as a matter of fact, we burnt, not myself personally, but some people burnt effigies of Salman Rushdie in Bradford and indeed in London. And I was just saying that analogously at the time, Yusuf Islam actually said, when somebody asked him on a live debate with me, we were among the Muslims there present, me and my brother Yusuf Islam, about the effigy burning. I didn't comment on it, but I remember Yusuf saying, perhaps he regretted it afterwards, I don't know. He said, well, I don't have time to attend effigy burnings. I'm a busy man. But if it were the real thing, I might attend.
That caused a little bit of a fluttering in the media.
Absolutely.
That's understandable hyperbole given the emotions at the time. But in your preface to your book on the Salman Rushdie campaign against his book, you put the argument perhaps of the adversaries in page 16 in the preface. You say freedom of religion is a right that conflicts with freedom of expression and speech. Thus, a citizen's right to believe in the faith of his or her own choice is in tension with the right of one's opponents to mock those freely chosen religious beliefs. The liberal state, meaning the UK, is committed to both principles simultaneously and must rely on the goodwill of its citizens to forego the right to offend others with opposed convictions. Religious believers, too, need to show respect for the consciences of their secularist detractors. Now, given that matrix, or legal matrix as you call it, and this is in reference obviously to the cartoons that appeared in several European nations as well, leading to the Charlie Hebdo murders in France, how do we square this circle? How do we have religious freedom of expression and the citizen's right also to criticize and even mock, according to the Charlie Hebdo people? They think it is their legal right in this country, in France. So how do you as a Muslim square this, living in the West, in this difficult conundrum?
Well, it's a great question, one of the more difficult ones actually raised by my preface. In the context of the preface, I was posing this as a problem for the liberal state that is committed to two potentially contradictory principles, and therefore the state needs to do something about it. But you're absolutely right to put the burden on me as well as a Muslim citizen of the United Kingdom. How should we deal with it? Can we? I mean, I'm very keen actually to work with Parliament, behind the scenes on some policy paper on this matter. How do we deal? Well, of course, de facto, what has happened so far is that, as you know, the blasphemy law in England and Wales was abolished rather than extended. We had asked for an extension to cover Islam. Under the law at the time in 1989, only Anglican sensibilities were protected against what's called scurrilous attack, extremely abusive. Yeah. So then, presumably now under the Public Disorder Act, some amendments, they're saying if something in a multicultural society causes extreme provocation, then the state may prosecute someone who has said something, let's say, to do with hate speech or trying to arouse sentiments which may get out of hand. Apart from self-censorship by authors, which I think is a separate issue, you're asking me about how do we deal with this legal tension? Well, as I say, primarily it's a problem for the liberal state. But what I'm saying, I'll say this now, it's not in my book. What I'm saying is that Muslims also need to show respect for the consciences, not only of other fellow, people of religions, Jews, Christians, but Hindus, Sikhs, but also the fact that the humanist tradition has a conscience too. There are some very fine human beings who are secular humanists, and they may passionately believe as a matter of principle. And I actually agree with this principle of freedom of speech. My concern is with its precise content and parliamentary limits as to exactly when it is permitted. And that's not a Muslim novelty. The law already recognizes limitations. So the way that this tension is dealt with in law de facto rather than de jure is that people in fact already A, self-censorship by authors, B, the government does take people to task if it thinks that what they've said is not simply a matter of religious prejudice, but what may be called racial discrimination. These are entirely different things. Religious prejudice is held to be something private, whereas all racism is public, because racism is prejudice, private prejudice, plus the power to implement your prejudice. That amounts to racism, and that's illegal. You just have to go to an industrial tribunal. So I would say that you'd have to look at this on a case-by-case basis. The citizens have the right to have, freedom of their worship, and other citizens have the right to mock the beliefs of these people who are religious. How do we, in practice, balance them? Well, people do, in fact, balance them to a variety of things. One, the law is rather ad hoc and piecemeal. It does have provision for public disorder, something that may lead to provocation of a scurrilous type. And of course, in practice, because the cultural capital that's now growing in Britain, whereby there's some informal respect for the Prophet Muhammad and for the Muslim faith developing over the last 30 years, It's not uniform. There are people who also, of course, as you know, in the cartoon affair, want to mock Islam. But I think there's a lot of self-restraint, especially in Britain. Less true in Denmark. In fact, even Finland had an incident by the cartoon. So, I mean, I
Yeah.
go into this in the book. Is that fair enough, Paul, for now? I'm sorry if I'm walking a bit. It's a
No,
very
no,
difficult.
it's a difficult subject. I was just reminded of two different things. At Speaker's Corner, which I go to sometime, that's a place
Right.
in Hyde Park in London where free speech is, by statute, actually by Act of Parliament, is protected by legal right.
Right.
There's been an incident recently where well, in my view, a notorious missionary who has desecrated the Quran by drilling holes in it and by wearing Charlie Hebdo cartoons every week and saying things which I won't repeat on camera about the Prophet himself. She was very regrettably, she was attacked, she was stabbed. Now she's okay physically, and Muslims have roundly condemned this physical attack on him, of course, but
Right.
nevertheless, she does seem to be protected in her right to be particularly noxious and abusive and insulting towards the Prophet of Islam, and I say physically desecrating the Quran, and that is protected by law. And there hasn't been and there's been obviously a lot of support in the press for her, uncritically, not taking into account that she is, in my view, a hate preacher. She's not offering arguments and criticism. She's offering abuse. And then I was reminded with the statues in, I don't know, in Whitehall and Trafalgar Square, like the one of Churchill in Parliament Square, which was had graffiti daubed in it, and that was not seen as acceptable free speech by society, and the perpetrators were arrested, and the graffiti was taken away. So it's okay to desecrate the Quran, but it's not okay to put graffiti on a statue of Winston Churchill about a mile away. And there seems to be some interesting standards, or perhaps not very
Yes,
consistent
absolutely.
implemented there.
Yeah, let me comment on both points, Paul.
Mm.
Yes, so this is part of a larger concern about double, possibly even triple standards of um, justice in this matter, to which Muslims are routinely subject, I'm afraid. We're not asking for any special prerogative. We're asking for fair treatment, equality under the law. Like, so, for example, if Holocaust denial is illegal in France, it seems very remarkable that Muslims are fair game. You know that Macron himself is taking somebody to task for Macron being portrayed as Hitler with the COVID requirement of vaccination. So there's lots of these cases. The lady whom you mentioned, whose name escapes me at Hyde Park,
Pattern is her name. She's from Turkey originally. Pattern, the lady in the Speaker's Corner. I mean, yeah,
she's presumably an evangelical
yes,
convert to Christianity. Yeah.
oh
Well,
yeah,
yeah, I think that her behavior is irresponsible, especially to desecrate physical copies of the Quran. However, she does, of course, have the right to say that she thinks that Islam is not a true religion. That's criticism. And especially with the zeal of the convert, she'll want to say that. I myself also condemn physical attacks on someone who says that. As you say, Paul, it's a right protected by statute law. Then the question simply is the individual who speaks there, and I've heard some very, very nasty and fiery stuff from both sides, by the way, I should add. I've attended it on occasion. And then it's simply a matter of being irresponsible, as she is. I mean, she should have weighed the consequence of saying such things. I'm not quite sure what her point was in desecrating the Quran, because all the points she wants to make, valid points about why she, on grounds of conscience, left Islam, let's say, and thinks there's something wrong with the faith and that Christianity is a superior offer of salvation. She has every right to say that. We're very lucky, actually, that we live in the United Kingdom, which I have always argued in my book 30 years ago too, a very mature liberal democracy. Why do I say it's mature? Well, the proof is that, thank God, we don't go around, the police doesn't go around gunning down people at demonstrations. I mean, I myself took place in many demonstrations, and the police were there to protect both the demonstrators and those who demonstrated against us, like Women Against Fundamentalism, for example. Made a counter demonstration in London in May of 1989. I remember that occasion. I tried myself to engage with them, saying, you've got very good points. We're not debating all injustices. We're just talking about Rushdie one book. And I always joke with people that, people say you are like Nazis with the Inquisition, with the burning of books. Well, we did burn only one book. I mean, and we were a powerless minority. The Nazis burnt many books, and they were powerful, and they were fascist, which we certainly are.
No, indeed, that's a very good point. Just to look at the last paragraph in your preface to the second edition of the book, you say something very interesting, relevant here, I think. You say, in your role as an organic rather than a deracinated public Muslim intellectual, you wish to see contemporary Islam treated as an indigenous faith, no longer a foreign transplant granted onto an alien and barren Western tree. Its practical fruit may not be a formal legal recognition of Islam's place in the Western public sector. However, it, meaning Islam, intends to achieve a minimum level of respect for the Prophet of Islam. This informal and internalized recognition of the dignity of our Prophet within culture, art, literature, and the moral values of the West would be no mean achievement. It would enable cohesion and harmony in societies that aspire to being mature democracies that can effectively manage internal dissent. And I think that's very well put. And I mean, it's something that Tim Winter said in his recent book on Muslims in Europe. That believers who aspire to follow the Abrahamic faith, the faith of Abraham, have more right, he says, to Europe as a heritage than atheists do, who disown the religious patrimony of their society. And I know what he means. Muslims, people who follow Abraham, see God. They see the glory of His creation. They understand the moral universe we live in, and so many of these aspects of Islam are identical to the traditional Christian indigenous understanding of society, man's role within it, and morality and traditional values. But these are rejected by the new atheists like Hawkins and Richard Harris and others. So in a curious way, Muslims have a better right, he argues, to Europe than the atheists do, who are often vociferous in campaigning against. I mean, at Speaker's Corner, some of the most hostile voices against Islam and Muslims are atheists. And the irony is that they are less they can identify less with the heritage of the West, he would argue, than Muslims can, who can say, yes, you were right to see God, traditional values, life after death, the resurrection of the dead, the day of judgment. All those themes are there in Christianity as they are in Islam.
Yes, a very intriguing question. Let me comment on that. I mean, firstly, Tariq Ramadan, my colleague until recently at Oxford University, and someone with whom I co-debated against Douglas Murray in Cambridge Union, and we won, I should add, has also, of course, for a long time, to argue about the idea of a European Islam in which Muslims are not aliens here, they are here to settle, and they should, he argued, develop a fiqh or legal system suitable for a minority, a Muslim minority. Professor Abdul Hakim Murad, another friend of mine, he has rightly argued in his book Traveling Home. If I would go further than Sheikh Murad on this point, I think that there should be recognition of classical, not modern, classical Arabic as every bit an important language of Europe as Greek and Latin. So I entirely agree with Abdul Hakim on this, and I would go a step further. Yes, I think that this is a very profound point that Abdul Hakim makes, that Islam, one of the Abrahamic faiths, has a greater right than the atheists lobby, which has repudiated the whole of the Christian heritage and indeed attacked it. So yeah, I'm very happy to see things in that direction. I think this will be the grounds for the development of a kind of cultural capital for the respect to Islam. Remember, cultural meaning, because culture and morally normative attitudes inside culture towards, say, the Prophet will be a precursor to formal legal ways of protecting Islam, which is my ultimate hope, which is what I meant in the preface to the last part of the preface you quoted at length, Paul. That was my point. About being organic and not deracinated, well, it's a big temptation, I think, for Muslims, intellectuals, to, once they become defenders of Islam, not to live among their people and to look at their concerns. This happens to many people. Marxism has suffered from this. The language that Marxist scholars use is not something the ordinary workers used in the factory floor. And therefore, although they claim to be defending ordinary workers, the proletariat feels that most of these university professors are talking to each other in the setting of Oxbridge and other feudal academia. So I want to belong to the people, and I did, and I do. Well, firstly, because I live in a state of involuntary holy poverty. Unlike the Prophet who lived in a state of voluntary holy poverty, I have no choice but to live among my people. I don't have the money to go and move out into the suburbs, but I enjoy living among our own people and serving them, placing my scholarship at their feet. I did that in Bradford. I mean, my only complaint, of course, is that sadly, as a culture, Muslims don't make any room for the intellectual or for the man of genius or for the scholar or whoever. They have a place for the um, alim who is into classical Islamic learning, but not for the place of simply a thinker who wants to serve Islam. Sadly, we don't have that place. I mean, there are reasons for this. I mentioned other books of mine, the one you mentioned on politics, that we are a religion which values martyrdom more than intellectuals, and that's fine by me. But still, it would be nice to get a bit of respect after serving the community actively for 30 years and laying my life at the time, against racist groups, and I didn't get police protection, and certainly my career, which has suffered a great deal because of standing up, and I don't regret it. That was the point of writing, by the way, this particular book. I wanted to say clearly that I'd like to reaffirm my commitment to the unnegotiable honor of the Prophet Muhammad uh,
Mm.
30 years on. In case someone thought I'd mellowed and was now, arguing for the fact that I was just a young man at the time in my late 20s, and now I no longer believe in it. I still affirm it.
No, good. I appreciate your strong, clear voice. And about the absence of intellectuals in the, I mean, so many Muslims I know are very bright. They become doctors, accountants. I don't know. They work in computing
Mm.
and so on. And I'm thinking, yeah, when someone going to try and be a philosopher or a New Testament scholar, a biblical scholar, for example. And actually,
Right.
I
Yeah.
know one person. I think you know him as well. I won't mention his name, of course. Who is doing a PhD at Oxford? Who's sorry, Muslim from a Pakistani background as well. Who is doing a doctorate in the Bible, and he hopefully will become a biblical scholar. But I think he's pretty much a pioneer, perhaps after you anyway. But we need
Right.
more. We need more Muslim voices in academia, in theology, and biblical studies, and history, and so on. I think the young shoots are coming through, but at the moment they're not as visible as they might be, shall we say?
Well, there are several things to be said about this. Do you want me to mention the name of the DPhil student, or
You can. I'm not going to
yeah.
because I have
I
his mission.
believe it's Saqib to whom you're referring, and he's doing a doctorate with the people with whom I work as well at the Center for Christian Muslim Studies. Yes, he's trying to acquire the original languages.
Yes.
Well, several issues on here, Paul, to be fair to why people, opt for law and engineering. Firstly, I come from a poor working class background in Bradford, and I remember my father being distinctly disappointed that I'd won a scholarship to Cambridge to read philosophy. I think he would have, if me and my two brothers had remained Pakistan, he would have liked to have seen us become commissioned army officers and go and fight the Indians in Kashmir. So it was a bit of disappointment to have a son who was going to be a bookworm all his life. Um, but, to be fair to why parents make that choice, I think it's because it's very difficult to earn a living in
True.
academia. This profile, I mean, since there's no one quite like me in terms of being a committed Muslim as well as a professional philosopher and a New Testament scholar and a poet, etc. And it means you're a pioneer, but it does mean that you're going to face a lot of hardship because you don't fit into any category and hard to earn a living unless you're lucky enough to have a private wealth or have patronage, neither of which I have. So it's been difficult, but God provides. Uh, and I think it's also true that as the Muslim community becomes more affluent, some people will want to become novelists and writers and academics and philosophers, but the other, and rather than merely always going into the safe professions,
Mm.
accounting, law, well, nothing wrong with those noble professions, good way to earn a living. But I think also that uh, to what extent this will happen depends upon if there are any role models of successful Muslim academics. Like, for example, Dr. Usama Al-Azmi has been at Oxford, my colleague, though not directly my colleague, but he's in Middle Eastern Studies at St. Anthony's, very fine scholar, has, fluency in Arabic as well as other languages. But then the question is, as young scholars, is he going to make it in academia? Will there be opposition, especially if he's a committed Muslim? A lot of Muslims in Western academia tends to sell out. If you want to remain yourself, true to yourself, like I have, and then try to create a counter narrative to what you think is wrong about Western liberal academia, but while earning a living within that academia, as opposed to being at a madrasa, it's a great achievement, but it does mean it's extremely difficult. So we had a conference in Oxford recently where some people wanted to look at examples of successful Muslim academics in academia. And sadly, it was pretty hard to find people in the humanities, with the exception of, sadly now, no longer with us, Professor Tariq Ramadan, Professor Dr. Fifi Al-Akiti is with us, a great scholar of Al-Ghazali, and we have Sheikh Murad. But I'm saying this is still only three people in the whole of feudal academia, but we got lots of engineers, we got professors of biochemical engineering. Sadly, also same caveat applies to nuclear physics, by the way. That's another dangerous profession to be in, apart from the risk of being assassinated by Israelis while you're living in Iran, and I'm sure stretch all the way to Oxford.
No, that's absolutely fascinating. I at the risk of boring the viewers, I do want to stress how worthwhile reading these two books authored by Dr. Shabbir Akhtar, The Quran and the Secular Mind, which I've read a few books, and this is one of the best I've ever read. It's an extraordinary synthesis of different registers of learning: Western philosophy, which you have a PhD in, obviously, and Islamic studies. The Quran, obviously, you can read the Arabic. And this engagement with secularism, which is absolutely fundamental, I think, here in France and in Britain and in America as well. So I strongly urge readers. It is an advanced text, and Sheikh Abdul Harim Murad, professor at Cambridge, has it on his recommended reading list. But it's an advanced text, so make of that what you will. But also Islam as a political religion, and it takes on board fearlessly the early expansion of the Muslim Ummah and the armies into the Levant and North Africa and so on, and the justification for that, and Islam as an imperial faith as well. And I like the bold, fearless way that you assert that, rather than the kind of apologetic, slightly defensive way. You assert the truth of that in a very good way, I think. So, and also for aspiring New Testament scholars or new students of the Bible who want to see a Muslim perspective, his commentary on Paul's letter to the Galatians, a really important letter in the New Testament, probably Paul's earliest, a minute engagement with the Greek, and also it's quite objective, actually. It's not a tendentious commentary. You're trying to bring out the meaning, but also you hold back quite often from making pronouncements. Clearly you're a Muslim, and you don't it comes out at the very end perhaps of the book. You view Paul's religious life in a somewhat negative way, but nevertheless as a work of scholarship, and is worthy to stand there with other commentaries by Jimmy Dunn and other British scholars as well. So I commend that the New Testament in Muslimized, Paul's letter to the Galatians, published by Routledge. And there's you say it's a 3-volume commentary. What would be the next one in that series, Dr. Shabbir?
Well, the next one will be a more general survey of the entire New Testament, with particular emphasis on one of the key Gospels called Gospel of Luke, which in my view is more or less fully compatible with the image of Jesus Christ in the Holy Quran. Yes. And I should add, by the way, that just very briefly, that the Galatians book has received a lot of favorable reviews from Christians, and also a lot of negative reviews. It's endorsed by Professor Paul Fides, Professor of Systematic Theology at the University of Oxford, my colleague, and one of my allies, actually. He says that the book he says that the book I've written comes from the center of Islam, because I'm a Sunni Orthodox defender of the faith. He said sometimes such works may be expected from progressive Muslims, or Muslims who are often seen by mainstream Muslims as not real believers. But he said, no one doubts your credentials. So that's important for me. I should say, on the Islamist political religion, kind of you to mention that, Paul. You're one of the few people who's actually discussed it, it's been ignored by critics. And I think the reason is because I think people found his arguments on the question of terrorism and Islam as a political religion, I think they found them unanswerable. I've done my best to boldly answer directly critics of the Prophet's political ministry, and I've also discussed political violence in the modern world, including 9/11. I've done it as fair as I could, and I noticed that nobody reviewed my book. And that can't be because I'm unknown to those people, because I noticed they have reviewed all my other works, including my three poetry volumes, but which is very difficult to get reviewed. But no one touched my book on politics.
That's a shame, because it is a substantial tome that deserves to be studied. It should be on
Thank
the
you.
bibliography undergraduate level. It's another advanced text, I would say, like the
Mhm.
Quran and the Secular
Yes,
Mind. But
yes, thank you.
he looks at all these issues from a Muslim point of view, but fully conversant with Western political theory
Yes.
and so on. So it's again an intellectual feast for those of us who enjoy such things. And that's, you serve up these wonderful dishes from time to time, and that's why I like your work so much. So
Well, I only wish for that my actual cooking was as good as these intellectual dishes that I serve up. Thank you, though.
we can't anyway. So the next one that you say in that series will be on the Gospel of Luke. Okay.
Yeah.
So is it work on Christology, perhaps? Is that the focus of that, or would it be a commentary on Luke, I should say?
Yeah, it is actually on Christology, not just on Luke. It's
Okay.
rather involved, I'm afraid, Paul, if you don't mind me saying so. It's complicated. I think you would follow it, but I'm not sure how many other people would, because you obviously know both Islam and Christianity intimately. Yes, it's a major work on Christology. I'd like to think it'll be a landmark once it's finished, along with the third volume, which looks at Christian origins, the question of revisionist history. My colleagues are very excited, although, of course, there are colleagues who are also very concerned because they wouldn't be happy. I mean, some people found my book on Galatians desolating, others found it exhilarating. These two words have been used by faculty colleagues.
Really? Well, those extraordinary adjectives to use of a work on New Testament studies. They're very, very emotive expressions. That's
That's
a good.
very true. That's very true. Yeah. Yeah.
Just coming back to that, when will your book on Christology be published, do you think?
Well, inshallah, God willing, it will be out sometime next year.
Next year. Good. Well, I shall certainly get that and review it on Blogging Theology. If
Thank you.
I
Thank
know
you,
still
Paul.
going, I shall certainly look forward to that enormously. Maybe this is a good time to bring our conversation to a close. But is there anything further you want to say? We haven't focused too much on the book. Be Careful with Muhammad. That's an interesting title. Be Careful with Muhammad. Where's that
Mhm.
come from? A very interesting
Well,
title.
it's a Persian proverb which was taken seriously by Western Christian missionaries working in Persia, in Iran. The proverb was, say whatever you like about God. Literally, be mad in taking liberties with God. But Hoshiar Muhammad in Farsi, be careful with Muhammad. Why? Well, because the Prophet of Islam is our man. We alone love him. Christians and Jews don't think much of it, or even think he's a prophet, let alone the final and greatest prophet. While of course Muslims are very generous to Jesus and to Moses, but no such courtesy shown to our prophet. However, uh, take liberties with God means that there's a legitimate doctrinal dispute about the nature and actions of God, whom we all share in the Abrahamic faith. But the Prophet Muhammad is simply our man, and we love him. And since we are the only ones to defend him, you people who don't understand our love for him, just be careful. I should say in this book, for the revised version, is very widely available. There's more technology now to do with Kindle and e-books and
Right.
PDFs and so on, which we didn't have. In the past it was just paperback. So it's very widely available. The big
Right.
emphasis on it is that it's a satirical work as well. I want to highlight the fact that I think that if we are going to be satirized, we should answer in the idiom of satire. So you'll have noticed in the preface quite a few jokes at the expense of my enemies and critics.
Okay. Well, that's a very British tradition as well, of course, going back centuries, political satires, cartoons, and so on. Well, that's excellent. I will put links in the box below, description box below, to Be Careful with Muhammad, this second edition, so you can get Kindle or hardback or paperback or whatever it comes in. But also to my two favorite books, The Quran and the Secular Mind, and Islam as a political religion. Oh, and also his commentary on Galatians, of course. So that's 4 books I'll put links to. That's probably enough to be going on. But there is a website. You have a website, Dr. Shabbir. I urge readers just to keep your eye on that, subscribe to it, and look out for this new book on Christology, on Luke's Gospel next year, because it promises to be a bit of a milestone, an event in the history of British publishing, in as much as you, as a Muslim theologian and philosopher, New Testament scholar, are writing on a Christian text, but in a way that puts you alongside the other New Testament scholars in Britain in their work on the Bible. So thank you so much for coming on Blogging Theology, Dr. Shabbir Akhtar, and hopefully we'll see you again, maybe to talk about your new book when that comes out. So thank you so much indeed.
Well, thank you, Paul. I'm very honored and pleased to have given this interview to you, Paul. As I say, a very erudite man. I can't see a picture of your library. I think that's enough to intimidate your viewers. You don't have your library in the background.
I'm actually in France.
I think you've got every book on Christian theology and on Islam ever published.
No, I'm actually in France at the moment, and I'm going back to London on Friday. We're back with my library. I don't have it here with me in France, unfortunately. So, all right, and until next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Paul. Bye-bye.